Good morning, everybody. I tried to record our class yesterday and it didn't work. When I went to download the recording, there was only half of it, and it was the half of the class that we spent in small groups. So I'm going to give you a quick review of what you missed for those of you who weren't able to attend. Where did I start? Oh, I remember. Okay. So yesterday, we spent time looking back at what we've done so far as it directly relates to what's coming up ahead. So to begin with, do you remember the day that I told you a little bit about being in the Costa Rican rainforest and what it was like to fly over the canopy versus what it was like to hike underneath at night? So that's kind of what we're going to pause and do right here when we think about writing and research. So I actually have something to share with you. Share my screen. Well, that's not it. All right. So if you see this, I've got 3 columns, and each of those columns is corresponding to one of the discrete practices that's part of a writing and research life. Because what I want you to become more and more aware of is that you have a particular kind of like a personal profile as a writer and researcher, and knowing what you're really good at and knowing where you've got some weaknesses. If you have a sense of the whole big picture of what writing and research involves, then you're more able to sort of shore up those weak places and play to those strengths. So if you think about reading, we've talked about how reading is actually a series of little micro moves that we do when we're rhetorically analyzing something. So we know that we can read something with an awareness of audience, communicator, and message. And we know that even along with those 3 basic elements, you can expand it even further. For example, what's the purpose of the piece? When did the piece come into existence and why? What was motivating it? Exigence. Genre. What type of object is the object of that communicative act? For example, a social media post would be considered a genre of communication. The rules in that genre are different than if you're writing an academic paper. Both of those spaces involve writing words, but the rules for those spaces are different. Does that make sense? We'll talk more and more and more about what these different words refer to, so that by the end of the term, you're more and more comfortable with how to use them. So you ask about what you're reading through the lenses of audience, communicator, message, purpose, exigence, genre, modality. Basically, how are we physically experiencing that moment of communication? Like right now, you're listening to my voice, you're seeing me type on a screen, but you're not sitting in the room with me. And so we're having like very different experiences of the modalities of learning right now. Excuse me, the smoke is really hurting my throat. Okay, another one would be considered circulation. How in the world is something getting out to the intended audience? A really practical example is, I mean, we just take this for granted, right? But a really practical example would be if I were to print off instructions for your upcoming rhetorical analysis and then go set them on a table in the UC. I have not actually done a good job of making sure that my message got to my intended audience. What I'm just hoping that some random English 180 students will wander by and be curious enough to look at a sheet of paper sitting on a table and then realize it's for them. Like that doesn't work. I don't deliver it to the wrong classrooms. I actually make sure that I have done my very best to circulate the message, i.e. assignment instructions, to the audience that needs it. So circulation's a big one. How do we reach the people we're really trying to reach? Mediums, like the technical means by which messages are sent out into the world. I think that's all of them. Exigence, Purpose, genre, modality, circulation, medium. Right, there we go. Okay, so when you're reading, you're becoming more and more aware of this sort of muscle memory of rhetorical analysis. You're constantly asking yourselves questions about how this text came to be in its particular shape. And remembering that reading isn't just reading written words. Texts can be all kinds of things that have been woven intentionally, which means that you can read any number of things that could be considered texts. All right, so this is one big pillar under the writing and research umbrella, one big set of practices that you exercise as readers. Next one's questioning. And there was a day in class when I gave you some categories of questions to look at. And basically the categories that I gave you were simply like strategies for developing good questions. So one of them is an explore. You can explore with your questions. What am I noticing? Why am I noticing it? What do I notice about what I notice? Explaining. How is this working? Let's see, what was the other one? Evaluating. Can she spell? No. Evaluating. How well is this working as a piece of communication? Reflection. What do I notice about what I think about this? So evaluating would also be like, what's most convincing? What's least convincing? So then when we get to the writing category, and if you'll notice that a lot of our readings, not this week in particular, but last week, a lot of our readings were directly about the quality of the questions that we ask and how we can create really robust questions and how we can ask questions about our questions to see if we're, to see what kind of insight we are uncovering. The questions themselves lead us to particular areas of, well, provisional answers, but more interesting or more creative questions lead us in totally different directions. I mean, if you think about questions, they're like adventures, really. Okay, so last area, writing. So we read the piece by Betty Flowers. She describes the stages of the writing process this way: madman. I wish I could think of a gender neutral word. If anybody's got a suggestion, please feel free to send it my way. Okay, madman. Oops. Architect, carpenter, and judge. But if you think about it, these actually correspond to words that you're probably far more familiar with when it comes to the writing process. Brainstorming, outlining, drafting. Oops. Editing. I can't type this early in the morning, clearly. Okay, so go ahead and make sure you've got, stopping sharing, and I'm still recording and I stopped sharing. I just have to tell you, I celebrate every small tech victory. Okay, so you got a sense now of those big picture and, okay, outlining. This is an important detail. I don't know about you, but I have certain ideas that I've been indoctrinated with over the years about what those certain stages should look like, different strategies that mean you've outlined your paper. My dad used to always ask, did you outline it? Did you outline it? And I just had this deep resistance. I couldn't stand this sort of linear march down the page of Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, capital letter A. I mean, it made me freeze. So what I discovered is a particular habit that really works well for me in terms of hitting that carpentry stage, no, excuse me, architectural stage of figuring out where the pieces are, but it's not a linear process. For example, for me, I start with free writing. I free write. I have to remove the sense of I'm producing something good. I have to remove that from my mind or I do get paralyzed. Once I have a lot of pages written, I take my scissors and I cut that piece apart, that free write apart, and I just start moving sentences and passages around. Like, what I was kind of getting at on page 2 I was sort of getting at again in another way on this page. So in a way they're repeating, but on the other hand, they've kind of got something to do with each other. I could go this way or this way. So what I do is I cut my free write apart. I group similar ideas together. I know that the way it first comes out of my mind and the way it needs to be presented on paper isn't the same. So it does need to go through some architectural design. The other thing I do is I look at the sources that I'm collecting, like the external sources that I'm going to be bringing into the piece. And if I know for sure that there's a quote that I want to use, I'm just not sure where it's going to go, but I know it's getting at something essential. I might write that quote down on a 3x5 card and then toss it into the mix. Did I mention yet that I'm doing all of this on the floor? So I have like this big space where I'm moving tangible pieces of paper around. So that's my way of outlining. And then eventually I'm like, okay, I can kind of see the order in which a draft is going to need to emerge. So the reason I give you that example is because when you see those stages, madman, architect, carpenter, judge, brainstorming, outlining, drafting, and editing, every one of us has particular ways that work for us. So what we're looking for this term isn't just that you could produce some final finished research pieces, but that you can discover as a writer and researcher and reader, the types of ways that work for you to hit those different stages of the process, all right? Okay, so that was one big thing we talked about yesterday, was big picture what we're doing and how it relates to the projects we're working on this term. The second thing we talked about yesterday was your upcoming rhetorical analysis. So this week, what you're doing is you're writing a research journal, and the research journal is comparing the piece by Annie Murphy Paul and the piece by J.T. Bushnell. They're both print or digitally available, but like long form writing. And one was published in a newspaper, one's published in a more specialized magazine for poets and writers. It's published in a magazine called Poets and Writers. Your job in this research journal is to ask why these two writers made the decisions they made in terms of how to get their message across and what it was about their audience and who they knew their audiences to be that helped them make decisions about how to present and what to present. So next week, you get to take that process a step further. And for your rhetorical analysis project, the one that's worth 20% of the grade, you're going to be choosing three what we'll call artifacts, which is basically three pieces, three communicative incidents. And you're going to be comparing them rhetorically and analyzing them through the lenses of those particular words that I put in the reading column. So if we wanted to use an example of how you might go about that, selecting your three pieces, for example. This week in the discussion questions, I had given you videos about the spearfisher woman, Kimmy Werner in Hawaii. And so you have these videos that you can consider texts because they're woven together. They've got a message, they've got a communicator, they've got an audience, they've got a purpose, they've got all of the parts. It's just not in writing. If that was one of your artifacts, how would you then go about choosing two more artifacts that are about the same thing, but that are crafted differently and for different audiences? So one thing that I thought of, I'm going to share my screen again. If I was really organized, which obviously I am not, I would have had these screens all ready to go for you. I'm sorry that I don't, but look at this. If we look up Kimmy Werner Instagram, okay, so you could choose, if I'm making a hypothetical rhetorical analysis assignment, you could choose one of those videos from the discussion forum, and then you could choose one of her posts, or as a text, an incident that you, an artifact. Or if you wanted, it wouldn't even have to be one of the posts. It could be her entire feed, right? Her Instagram audience is, what can you imagine would be true of them? And then how do these little posts represent or reflect a real purpose in the way that she crafts tiny messages via her pictures and her captions? Okay, another artifact about the same thing. Kimmy Werner Gear Patrol. Please find it inside. There we go. Good. So here's another thing. This one is another piece about the same subject, Kimmy and her spearfishing. And this one's created by someone named Chris Wright. It was published in January 2018 from issue 4 of Gear Patrol magazine. And this one is written like, you know, a more traditional article. So this could be considered another artifact that you might use if you were choosing her as your subject for your rhetorical analysis. I'm almost done, by the way. I'm wrapping this up. The thing to remember with that rhetorical analysis is that when you are writing it, please include screenshots of the first page or of the artifacts that you are comparing and contrasting so that I'm able to see kind of what you're working with. So that was the second thing we talked about yesterday. If you have any questions about any of this, please reach out. I'm happy to try and explain or clarify. Okay, then the third thing, last thing, is that Monday, Linda Irons, our research librarian, is going to be coming to class and giving an orientation about how to find, select resources for your research projects this term. If you want to come to that class already having a sense of what your topic will be, then go ahead and look ahead to next week, because the research journal for next week is called Ideas and Questions. And that research journal takes you through some really tangible steps for creating a roster of possible topics for a research paper. We did this in class yesterday, and I've already received emails from students saying, hey, could I write about this? Hey, can I write about that? Linda had offered that for those students who were able to get to her by 5 p.m. yesterday, she would be able to offer like a personalized research strategy tailored to each student's topic. So if you're watching this, then you probably didn't get that message in time. I didn't actually realize it was an option until yesterday. So I'm sorry, I would have told you sooner if I had known sooner and finished this video sooner, but I didn't. So all that to say, just because you might have missed that opportunity doesn't necessarily mean that it's all behind you, because you can make personal appointments with Linda and she can help you create research strategies as you look ahead to your projects. Okay, this has been a lot of me talking and I'm gonna wrap it up now, but if I missed anything, if anything I said is super confusing, please reach out. Please reach out. I missed seeing your faces in class, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again when we can. I hope you are staying healthy in this smoke. I'm doing my best, and I will see you next time. All right.